absolute. I don't have the words. I don't have the words. I've been looking for them for a while now, and they don't exist in any dictionary. It's, oh man, game of the year, easily. Game of the year. This is hands down, no contest, the best thing that I'll be playing this year, or next year, or the year after that, maybe. And I say this knowing full well that some high-profile games have still to launch this year, assuming they will with the whole COVID-19 situation. But even then, right, the story was there for as far as the story is told at this point. The gameplay was there, and the nostalgia is there, and especially the nostalgia factor plays a large part in my bias towards raving about this game as much as I'm doing. But very, very few things that I didn't like about this game, and the few things that I didn't like were minor complaints, really, not the kind of complaints you find with every game, because no game is literally flawless. But I'm getting ahead of myself, right? Let's just take this one step at a time. So for now, Final Fantasy VII Remake review coming up next. If you're sensitive to spoilers, you may want to turn away now, because I do need to get this off my chest, so I'm not going to hold back. So this is the re-envisioning of a game that's, by all accounts and purposes, been 23 years in the making. The original game came out in 1997. It's a long time ago, right? If you say 23 years quickly, it's just, well, it's 23 years. I mean, 1997. Right? HD wasn't a thing yet. The internet was up and coming. It's Final Fantasy VII is revered as one of the best games in the Final Fantasy franchise, and even as one of the best games of all time. You'll find some people who would argue that's really the case. At the time, it was a pivotal graphical masterpiece. You know, the first entry to use polygons and actual 3D models to tell the story, as opposed to sprite-based games, which was Square's forte before Final Fantasy VII. And it's pretty amusing that in this day and age, Final Fantasy VII Remake is again a graphical masterpiece and one of the best games out there at this time, especially as far as Final Fantasy games go. It's what's frightening though is that this is just a small portion of the game, right? It's not the whole thing yet. And that in and of itself is mind-boggling. And to think that I'm almost scared to think what the completed package is going to be, right? Once all the parts are out and we've got the entire story. I'd like to place a bet and say that this remake might actually be a lot better than the original Final Fantasy VII game. Because as great as the original Final Fantasy VII is, there's a lot of nonsense in there. And the 7 Remake still has some of that nonsense, but in a good way. And all the other story elements have been fine-tuned in a way that they make a little more sense. And I'll get into that in just a bit. But yeah, let's just take it from the top. I want to talk about the characters first and foremost, because I don't know what devil magic Square used here, but I suggest they get more of it, because this was incredible, right? The characters, they look flawless. I don't know how it's possible. Every major character, and even the minor characters, but the major characters in particular, they look so good. Right? I look at Cloud and I think, yeah, this is what Cloud Strife looks like. This is not. He's strong. He looks strong. Right? He looks a little. He doesn't look buff. Barrett looks buffed. Cloud just looks very, very toned. Cloud. I don't know what athletes they used in reference to make him, but it's just really good, right? He doesn't look overly strong. He looks like he can actually move the way he does, like a soldier would. And even his hair, I look at it and I'm like, well, it's a staple classic hairstyle, but it doesn't look overly jarring in a way that it might do in the original Final Fantasy VII, where it's really just sticking out in a way that makes you think, what is this hair? And here I'm sort of like, yeah, sure, it's a unique hairstyle, I give it that, but it doesn't look overly out of place. Then I'm looking at Tifa, who managed to re-establish her as the ultimate video game bombshell, and I won't hear otherwise. It's not just her looks, even though she looks absolutely incredible, but it's her character, right? In the original game, she already put herself down as more than just a pretty girl, and this time it's the exact same. Right, the amount of times that she saved my ass, I don't think I can count it on one hand anymore. Right, the amount of times that she's like, well, whatever's going down here, I don't like it, but I'll just suck it up and I'll deal with it, and I'll get my hands dirty if I have to. She is it. She is it. If I look at Aerith, there's just this air of innocence about her. Her whole way of speaking, her happy-go-lucky sort of attitude. Well, maybe that's not the right way to put it, but just her carefree approach to things. And maybe that's because she knows a little more than we all do, right? She sees the world in a different light. But just her mannerisms, it's just so... She's the definition of a happy person, right? Just making the best of every situation, and that combined with this particular pureness that I can't really put my finger on, is again just a perfect translation from old to new. Sephiroth, right? If we're talking about a stage presence, this guy can just show up, not say a word, and the scene will still work. I don't know how they do it, but there's this chill that runs down my spine every time this guy shows up. And I'm sure the music plays a part in it, but it's just the expression on this guy's face. And I suppose it comes with knowing what this guy is capable of, but I'm sure that someone who hasn't played Final Fantasy will look at this guy and think, okay, I probably need to take a step back here, because I don't know what this means per se. That's Sephiroth. And I can't wait for the final showdown, or at least see where the story's going to take us, because the story has taken a few detours here and there that are unfamiliar to me. I look at Red 13 and I think they made this guy so pettable. He looks absolutely stellar in terms of fuzziness, furry detail. He looked okay in the Final Fantasy Advent Children movie, but there was this weird sort of fuzziness, this blurriness to them that I can't really place. And he looks just so sharp and crisp here. Barrett is colossal. He is really, really big and really, really strong. I guess that's what they would portray a coal miner like, because that's his background. And they did a really great job capturing his passion. He's very passionate about the things that he wants to do and the things that he likes and the things that he cares about, to the extent that there are times where I think, Barrett, just shut the fuck up for like 5 seconds. And that's good, right? If you have that sort of connection with the character, it means that whatever they're doing, it's coming across as genuine and as honest. And, Barrett, he has a one-track mind. He cares about Marlene and he cares about the planet. And he will go to any lengths to make sure that his ideals are realized. And I appreciate that in Barrett, because that's what I know him as. In the original game, he did cuss a lot more, I guess. Well, he's still complaining in this game, but in this remake there are more ways to show someone's high spiritedness, or passions or discontent, other than just a text box, which is all we had to go by back in those days. And I have to say that even the characters that aren't immediately the main characters, right? Just every NPC, really, I feel that there has been a lot of work put into every single NPC you see in the game, which is it's out of this world, the amount of detail that's gone into every single thing. But if I look at the Avalanche Cast, right? Jessie. Jessie is so much fun. She's that girl that I would have as a best friend, and when we go out to have some fun, I'd have to try my damnedest not to let her get into any kind of trouble, right? She's that crazy girl, and honestly, I could see myself hanging out with her. That's the amount of depth and detail Square's managed to put into these characters, right? I'd love to just sit down and have a chat with Biggs, right, and see his view of the world. It's really, really amazing. And when you have a cast of characters that not only look the part, but also sound the part, right? If I look at the Advent Children movie, dialogue in that game felt a bit, you know, it just felt off. It just felt a little bit trying very hard to sound mystic almost. And in this game, dialogue just feels real. It feels like how people would talk to one another, right? We're talking plans, but we're also talking bullshit. We're complaining, just like you and I do. And that's been translated beautifully in this game. So when you have a cast that looks real and feels real, then, you know, sky's the limit. If you add half a decent script behind that, you've probably already got a great story lined up. But the script wasn't just good, it was great. And yeah, the characters... Again, I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And since we're on the topic of good-looking things, the world builders definitely deserve a raise, don't they? Man, this place looks... It's amazing. It really is. The first time that I stood in the slums and looked up and I saw the bottom of the plate, man, that was Divide by Zero for me. Right? In the original game, you have sort of this top-down view when you're walking around there, so you never see the bottom of the plate. So when I looked up, it was a hard thing comprehending it, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, of course you can see the bottom of the plate. So this is what the bottom of the plate looks like. It was such a surreal moment, and this game is full of moments like that, right? It's full of just things that will. Any veteran of the game, right? Anyone who's really familiar with the original version of the game will, at every step, it seems, run into little things that makes them go, "Oh right," and it's just such a feels good kind of thing. Same goes for the little details like materia being slotted into the weapons, and actually being able to see that materia. It's a subtle detail, but it really adds a lot to the overall feel. And you know, the fact that when I equip a different weapon, I'm actually seeing that on my in-game model. You know, usually you see a default weapon on a character, and once you go into battle, it swaps to what you're actually using. But in this case, there's a sense of consistency and continuation to that whole feel. And yeah, it's those things that really stand out to me, odd as it may seem, because you know, when you think of the world and the detailing in it, you look at the actual graphical, the big set pieces, and sure, they are amazing, but I like attention to detail, and it's nice to see that they went above and beyond for both the big stuff and the smaller stuff. Right? When I walked through the tunnel that connects Sector 5 to Sector 6, I'm walking through a tunnel, but I'm walking around thinking, wow, this is really detailed. This looks really good. It's a fucking tunnel. If we're talking about major set pieces, wall market, come on. That was me in a candy store, really. It's man, overall this game has the look and feel down. If they can keep this up for part 2 and part 3, then it's a done deal already. And speaking about the Honeybee Inn, I really wish I could have been at the meeting where they decided what was going down in there. All right, everyone. So what are we gonna do with the wall market? What about Honeybee Inn? That's our next topic, I believe.
Well, times have changed, but I'm still pretty sure that we should have the honeybees and the honey boys. I think it's a staple thing in the game, and it should be in there, full kit and all.
Yes, a lot of us agreed on that, and we do plan to have the entire Honeybee Inn, as the fans know it, present in the game.
How about we remodel the Honeybee Inn to be like an actual hostess bar?
A hostess bar? Well, yes, I suppose we could. We could convey it as a sort of a cultural thing. That's actually not a bad idea.
And we should have like a dance scene.
A dance scene.
Yes, like a great opening of the night sort of dance sequence.
Well, a hostess bar is by all accounts and purposes also a cabaret sort of place. Maybe we could have some sort of dance opening. Maybe?
Yes, and we should have Cloud participate in a sort of interactive dance battle.
Get out. Now. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's so very unlike Cloud to be present in that situation, and the whole scene just felt so extreme. You know, I've said it before, it felt very Yakuza-like, and I'm sure that's where they drew inspiration from, but even then, to have it be present in a game like this is just, it came out of nowhere. And I'm pretty sure that for a lot of people on the team, this was a bit of a gamble. Or perhaps it turned out as great as it did because it so not fits Cloud. And they said, well, the only way this can work is if we portray Cloud to really, really, really not like this. And I suppose it paid off. It's not something people are going to forget. I know I can't forget it. Even if I wanted to, it's not something that I can erase from my retina or my memory, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, it's that scene is great for all the good reasons and for all the bad reasons, and it will go down in history. It will go down in history. Let me talk about combat for a second. The combat is essentially 50% of any Final Fantasy game, right? So if the combat is not there, then you're essentially enjoying 50% of the game. And I'm happy to say that the combat was really, really, really fun. The Stagger System that they implemented is a very welcome addition because it makes it gives just a little more dynamic to any fight, really. Right? The idea is that you fill a certain gauge that ultimately staggers an enemy, therefore allowing you to deal more damage to the enemy. And that stagger gauge is filled by playing to an enemy's weakness. And if you use the assess materia, which is essentially scan, right? We know it as scan. And this is actually the first Final Fantasy game ever where I've really cared about it, where I've used it all throughout the game. I never did so prior to this game, which is impressive in its own right. And you assess those enemies and you find out about their weakness. And not just the elemental weakness, but also stating, you know, if you damage part X or part Y, it makes the enemy easier to stagger, and that's ultimately what you want. Especially in late game battles, where enemies become a lot tankier and a lot stronger, you really want to get that method of dealing with them effectively down as quickly as possible. The option to use the menu, right, the sort of menu-based attack pattern as opposed to shortcuts is something that I can highly appreciate, right? Giving me the option to use either the one or the other, or in most people's cases, a mixture of both. Really, you start out with using the menus probably because that's what we know this game to use, if I may express it in that way. But gradually, as you get more and more accustomed to battle, and you get more, just more know-how, it's almost a natural shift from the old school to the new school, which is using the shortcuts to effectively make battle flow a lot more natural, right? I only use the menus to use items that I couldn't lock in for my shortcuts. Other than that, it was shortcut all the way through. I think from episode chapter 5-ish onward, that's really where I started to get a grasp of the combat, and also switching between characters, which I'm happy I was able to do. Right, I was prior to this game coming out, I was wondering, well, am I going to control all the characters, or is it just going to be Cloud and I'm going to be issuing commands to my other party members? And I'm very happy that there was this dynamic that I could employ, if you will. Right, I'm fighting as one character. That character gets grabbed or bound, and I can't use them, which is really just another incentive of the game that says, well, you can't use this character for a few seconds. Go try the other character. You see what you can do. See if you can get some sort of synergy going between the characters that are currently fighting. And it works really well. The fact that Barrett actually has this ranged cannon on his arm, allowing him to reach otherwise unreachable places, is something that I highly appreciate. Ranged attacks were already a part in the original Final Fantasy VII game, and I was wondering how that would translate to this game, where you have this sort of arena in which you run about. So if I have Cloud and his sword, I should be able to do the same what Barrett is doing. But there are actually some enemies that are simply out of reach, and you need to use either Barrett's long-range gun, or you need to use magic to take him out. So to have this sort of this dynamic going on is something that really shows its worth once it clicks, right? Once you're actively switching from character to character to character, not just issuing commands, playing as one character, but actually running around and doing things as them rather than asking things from them. Boss fights were a highlight in this game, and I'm very happy that they were. There are quite a few bosses, but the way that they've handled them is spectacular, and I mean that in a literal sense. And that is because they implemented mechanics that you have to use. Prior to this game, many Final Fantasy titles, you fight a boss and it really is just it's a battle of attrition, right? It's an enemy that just has slightly more HP and does slightly more damage, and it's up to you to manage your inventory and your attack versus defensive actions to take it down. And if that were the case again here, it would be on the list of my my complaints, which I'll get into in a little bit. But I'm very happy that it wasn't. There are the bosses have phases. They go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, and every phase you need to look for the little details where you can exploit their weakness. And I'd like to touch on what is probably my favorite boss fight in the game, the Hell House. The silliest enemy of the original game did not only manage to make it into the remake, it managed to make its way into the remake as a boss fight. It managed to make itself into this game as probably my favorite boss fight, because this was so high octane. Right there, as you use assess magic on it, you learn that you need to use polar opposites in terms of magic in order to make it vulnerable. But as the battle just escalates and escalates, it starts doing more ludicrous stuff, really. And you have to look out for the small windows of opportunity where you can attack. And it was way too late into the fight where I realized that I had to use option A as opposed to option B, which I had been using. And by implementing a system that forces the player not just to mindlessly attack, but actually think about what they have to do, it makes the fact that these bosses are so tanky and so strong that much less of a chore, right? This was fun. Every boss fight was absolutely amazing. Whether it was the Hell House, which stands at my top 1 probably, but even the Airbuster, right, which didn't actually have many mechanics in the actual fight, but you had to go through an entire complex trying to sabotage this thing, and depending on the options that you choose to disable, you will have a vastly different battle. I'm sure I could play through the game now, change the choices that I made, and the fight would develop in a completely different way. I look at the ghoul who we fought at the train graveyard, who switches between a physical form and an ethereal form, where you have to use physical attacks and magic attacks respectively in order to even deal damage to it, right? The mechanics don't have to be extreme and huge, right? As long as there is a mechanic, it makes a fight that much more interesting. And I'm happy that this was implemented. The skills being tied to weapons is also something that I highly appreciate. Right? It's not just skills that you learn over time, but it's skills that come with a weapon, because it forces a change in your battle, in your playstyle. Right? Whenever you get something new, it works in a slightly different way, right? Be it in range or how you have to properly apply it. And this forces a shift in how you do things. And it also kind of forces you to try out something new, which is not a bad thing. The only time where I really didn't like it is when I had to use melee weapons with Barrett, because it takes away my ranged ability. So those were really just skills that I wanted to learn for the sake of wanting to learn the skills, and I didn't really care about the weapons beyond that. But for everyone else, right, you have these physical-based weapons, you have these magical-based weapons, and it's up to you to find out, well, how do I want to develop my characters? What do I want to focus on? And beyond that, combat just looks really flashy, and it was a treat to see some of those skills, right? If we look at Infinity's End, or my personal favorite, Star Shower, I can cast those skills all day long and not get tired of them. And let's not even start about the limit breaks, because they went above and beyond when it comes to those. Especially those level 2 limit breaks, right? That is that over the top Final Fantasy-ness that I know and love. It's absolutely ridiculous, but that's the charm in it, right? Same goes for some of the enemies, where a sort of half turtle with a trident, yeah, sure, or a small sort of mutated hedgehog, yeah, sure. Right? It's those Final Fantasy traits that they've managed to translate so well, that makes combat that much more enjoyable. Right? It was amazing seeing some of those old enemies born anew, really, and there were quite a few enemies of which I didn't expect them to be in the game, and they were, in full glory, and it was just so good. What also was so good was the story presented as it is up until now. They adapted it really, really, really well. All right, it's not a one-on-one redo of the story. They've adapted it, and they've made some changes here and there. Some of which I've got my question marks put above. Not that I question it, but it's just that I really, really want to know what's going on from here on out. And there are also some changes that make me think, yeah, that's probably for the better, or yeah, that makes more sense. And I'm happy that they took the game back to the drawing board, essentially, and figured out, this and this and this and this we should probably change for the better, and they did. Notably, at the start of the game, you are appointed a room at a motel, and your next door neighbor is a character whom we originally find in some drainage pipe in slum number 5. And to see him there at that point in time, it blew my mind. I didn't expect those minor occurrences in the original game to have such a strong impact in this remake, because he does have a very strong impact, as you'll either have seen or will see if you decide to play the game after hearing this. There are also some additions that are completely new, which is also a very, very welcome thing about this game, because you've got your expectations set, and you think you know what to expect, and then something entirely new gets thrown your way, and it's almost like a present because you didn't expect it, right? Take joining Jesse to the upper plate for the Shinra raid it's a great little side story to get not more information about the world as a whole, but also it's a bonding moment, right? You learn more about the characters whom we originally know very little about. Overall, the impact that you're having on the world, or in this case Midgar, because that's the world currently, it's so much more present. It's so much more visual. Some of the actions that you performed in the original game sort of get brushed under the rug. This time around, you see the effect that you have on the life around you, and it's almost like a guilt trip. The game goes out of its way to show you, yeah, you bombed that reactor, and you see the effect that you're having here, right? Are you proud of yourself? And I really appreciate that, right? To see the direct results of what I'm doing, and that I'm not just following some noble cause, but that to others around me who are not part of Avalanche, who may have not even heard of it or particularly care about it, they'll be thinking, yeah, well, I lost a large portion of my life just now because of what they did, right? Indirectly. And that's just, it's really, it makes it feel right, as wrong as it is. There are even some just even more subtle changes, right? The one that stuck out the most to me, and because it was very late game, we fight that arsenal thing, which in the original game, the boss fight against Arsenal is held in the actual elevator, which just keeps going down for as long as the boss fight continues, right? And this time around, we reach floor X, we get out, and then we have the fight on the actual floor that we're on, right? Those small minor changes just make so much sense. It makes the game better for it, I do believe. As far as story development goes, it's nice to see that it also forces you to play with certain characters at any given time. In previous Final Fantasy games, typically you build your party and you settle on 3 characters that you like the most, really, and the rest is just warming the bench, right? And this time around, this is really because we only have 4 characters, so it's easier to swap characters in and out based on the story. But even then, I like how the game just takes a character away from you and replaces it with another. It forces you to learn how to play with them, and it forces you to change the tactics that you've been deploying up until that point. And it changes the entire dynamic in terms of combat. And from a story point of view, it also makes sense. Everything that has been happening makes sense, and I do appreciate that they don't just take characters away from me for the sake of forcing me to try someone else. No, it actually, it's in tandem with the story. And I do wonder how this is going to translate into the continuation of the story when we do build a bigger party. If I'll still be forced to play with any certain group of characters at a given time, or if they're going to be more lenient with it. Because I believe in the original game, at the end, you've got, I think your cast is like 9 characters big. It's hard to build a story around swapping out 9 characters time and time again. But, perhaps we won't even see that. The music, they went above and beyond in recreating this track, and I'm very, very happy that they did, because I was skeptical, scared almost, because I come from the Final Fantasy X Remake, and hearing that soundtrack, it sounds, to keep it polite, it sounds oversaturated, and I don't like the remaster soundtrack. I just don't. And having come from that, I was thinking, what are they going to do with the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack? I love the original. but it's in MIDI format, so I was very much looking forward to this actual sort of orchestral reinvention of the soundtrack. But if it was gonna be as oversaturated as they did with Final Fantasy X, it was gonna, pun intended, it was probably gonna end on a sour note for me. But nothing is farther from the truth. They did such an amazing job in translating a few iconic pieces and putting them in a modern jacket. It's every time I heard something, I was like, wait, hey, I know that. And not only do I know it, it also sounds really, really good. And that's just for the music that I know. There are a few original tracks on this soundtrack as well that are equally as stellar. Probably my favorite track from this new soundtrack is the battle theme that you hear when fighting the mysterious specters, which I don't know how they did it, but everything sounds so very good. So I'm happy that they went the extra length, the extra mile to deliver a soundtrack that lives up to the expectations of people, because I'm sure that they have been met. So with all my showering praise, does that mean that I've got nothing bad to say about this game? No, there are a few things that stood out to me that I do want to mention. First off, that Hip Hop the Chocobo song, that jukebox thing, whoever made that needs to be shot, that first and foremost. Second, there's only one magnifying materia, and I've often found myself lacking in terms of that. I really wish I had two of those, but that's just me wanting things to be easy, I suppose. The main thing that I want to get off my chest that really stood out to me is the summon battles. I mentioned previously that boss fights stood out to me because they had such an amazing stage presence, right? They come with certain mechanics, they come with phases to them, and each phase requires you to adapt to the battle just a little bit, and to make sure that you get through in one piece. And that is what made those boss battles fun, right? Those bosses had a lot of HP, they were very tanky, they dealt a lot of damage, but because there were certain mechanics to them, certain ways to work with them, it made those battles fun. The summons don't have that approach. I mean, an argument could be made for Shiva that she's weak to fire, but that doesn't really count. Other than that, there is no obvious weakness that you can or have to exploit in order to stagger them easily, or there is and I missed it, but I don't think I did. And in particular, Leviathan and Bahamut, who are very tanky. I really enjoyed those battles, don't get me wrong, but I enjoyed them more for the nostalgia factor, I think. Right? For me, it really was a joy to see those summons reimagined in a 2020 sort of graphical overhaul, and getting to fight them before I can use them was a nice little gimmick, I suppose. But those battles, they're just a battle of attrition, like so many boss fights have been in the past. And considering so many bosses in this game have this special mechanic to them, to see that the summons of all things didn't really get that treatment, it's a shame, really. I mean, it's not, those battles aren't bad, right? The summons appear larger than life in a way, especially Leviathan. He's a towering guy, but that's really all there is to it. And it would have been nice to see a similar approach taken with the summons as had been done with the bosses in this game. That's the main thing that stood out to me. Another thing that struck me is that in chapter 4, you encounter a guy called Roach, right? The soldier. And as grand as his entrance was, and as big a ruckus as he creates, saying, yeah, you're my friend now. It's a one-sided thing, right? We're friends now, and we'll meet each other again. And he just fucks off. We don't see him for the rest of the game. I very much expected him to show up again at that last highway scene, right before we fight Motorball, but nothing. And I guess I can hope that we'll run into him again in later installments. But if that's not the case, then I'm kind of thinking, well, what was the point of introducing him in such a grand way if this was just a one-off, right? It would have been cool to have seen him at least one more time before the game was over, no matter how minor his screen time would or could have been. It just feels a bit out there now. So I ran a total of 59 sets of stairs at the Shinra headquarters. I didn't get a chest. Nothing. In the original game, like halfway through, you get an elixir, I think it is, right? Something minor, but there was something there. I get nothing for my troubles. Well, I get some bitching from the rest of the crew. I mean, the banter was gold, sure, but there was nothing else besides sore legs, really. Another small thing that really just irritated me was the fact that at times I have to press triangle to do something or to open something, and other times I have to press and hold triangle to do or flip a switch or whatever. There's no need for me to press and hold it. Why was that a thing? Was that just sneakily loading assets? Much like the shimmying that also still exists. It's I get the shimmying, right? It's shown in many games. It's hiding a loading screen in plain sight. That's what it is. So I acknowledge that. It's annoying, but I'll acknowledge it. But you know, the press and hold triangle, I think they could have just given me just push the button, right? Another thing that I would like to mention, it's not a complaint, it's just me getting it out there, is a major portion of the story is just high octane god tier sort of quality stuff, and you know, then there are a few chapters that in comparison just feel lackluster, or just feel a little bland. Take shutting off the lights beneath sector, what was it, sector 5, sector 4, something like that, in chapter 5 or 6. And then there is the whole of chapter 14 where I'm just doing side quests, which in and of itself is just, you know, it's bland. It's a necessary evil, right? You need to get those levels in, and it's a good way to get some experience. I get that, but it's lackluster. At the same time, I also think that you need those lows in order to appreciate the highs, right? You can't just have everything consistently high in order to really appreciate the really standout stuff, I don't think. But again, it's something that I wanted to mention, that there are a few dips here and there that just sort of stagnate the story in a way. And I know it's weird saying that, seeing as I grinded my way to level 50 in order to beat Bahamut, but I hope you get what I'm saying. Again, it's not a real complaint, it's just something that I wanted to put out there. So I guess from here we'll be going into speculations for future installments to see what is going to happen from here on. Will the world open up as it did in the 97 version of the game? The story in this first part of the remake was so focused that its restraints weren't that much of a bother to me. Final Fantasy games are always known for how open they are, for how much freedom they give you, but if you're so tied and so immersed into a story, you don't really notice some of the restraints put on you, and that's at least how I felt in this game, right? And if I look back at the intro of this game, it shows a gargantuan size. And that is not something that you can leg on a world map anymore, right? You don't take 15 paces and you end up in the town of Calm. It's just not going to work like that anymore. So how is that going to work? Are we going to go there from a story point of view, not even traveling on the world map at all? Or will I be traveling exclusively via bike or via Chocobo? I'd love to travel via Chocobo, really. It's been done in Final Fantasy 15, so I suppose it could be done again in Final Fantasy VII, but it does beg the question, what's going to happen, right? Is the world really going to open up as much as it is? Does the PlayStation 5 offer that capacity? Right? Could it be done? Who are we going to run into in the next installment? Are we going to complete our entire cast, or are some characters going to be left for a future installment to make playing with any characters at a given time more feasible? Right, as I touched on just now, it's easy to swap out one person for another so the team feels fresh again, so you play with everyone else. Once you build your entire cast, it's going to be a lot harder to do. But if they introduce only a few characters and not everyone at once, it could actually be done. Question is, Red 13 is a given, right? He's already in my party, I just couldn't play with him. As him, I should say. Are we going to run into Yuffie? Are we going to run into Vincent? And I would like to state that these are no longer characters that are hidden. In the original game, those were characters that weren't part of the actual cast. They were hidden characters that you could find, but you wouldn't run into them story-wise. But at this point, those two characters are so intrinsically linked into the lore of Final Fantasy VII that I am 100% sure they are not optional. Besides, there is simply too much work and effort going into realizing these characters that they simply couldn't get away with it. I think the only character that I could see omitted from the cast is probably Sith. Right? He really exists just to backstab you, so he could become a story element rather than a playable character. Even though I do think that they will realize him for the sake of the past, really. But it does beg the question: will we see Yuffie, Vincent, Cid, Sith? It's going to be interesting to see. I also wonder if how progression is going to be carried over to the next installment, if at all. Right, I'm currently level 50 and I'm figuring they put a cap on that. So do I level from 50 to like 75? Or do I level from 50 to 100? And is 100 not the level cap this time? Will I have to re-level materia again? Does Yuffie show up, steal all my materia, giving me an excuse to level everything anew again? Something like that could work. Do I keep the summons I have? I expect that I do. Do I keep weapons? Do I keep bracelets? It's all stuff that I'm really interested to see how they're gonna parse that into the next game, especially because the next installment is going to be on the PlayStation 5. So how would I copy progression over to the next game? Perhaps they will just wipe everything and say, well, here's a clean slate, you can start again. And the summons that I acquired in this game are simply not going to be in the other game at all. Another thing that bothers me is the fact that things got really, really jumbled at the end of this game. Right? I saw stuff coming in from Final Fantasy Advent Children. And I saw Zack, who was supposed to be dead, but seemed very much alive. Then there was this whole 7 seconds till the end thing that Sephiroth said to me, and I have no idea what that means. And it really makes me wonder how much they're gonna deviate from the path that everyone knows. Perhaps they're gonna change the story entirely, and really it would be interesting to see what they can and would do with it. It's just that one thing that I do hope happens, right? No matter what they do, I hope that, and again, this is a spoiler, but it's a spoiler that at this point everyone knows. I do hope that Hiraeth still dies. Not that I want her to, but from a story point of view, it was such a heavy and impactful thing back in the day. And nowadays, you could say, well, so many characters die in video games, so what? Yeah, but this was special. And add to that, because of this, the whole bonding that's been introduced in this game, right? If I look at Tifa and Hiraeth, those two are best friends. They became best friends like that. And now that I've I've gotten so much closer to everyone. I think that an eventual death is going to be that much more devastating. I think that if they play it right, despite knowing what's going to happen, I think it will be gut-wrenching to everyone. Right? They've proven with this title that they can still, right, give a spin, give a curveball, and I saw that with Jesse in chapter 12. I saw it with Biggs in chapter 12. Tifa breaking down in chapter 13. Right? You're invested in the story. You're emotionally invested. So when this happens, when Sephiroth comes down and just slices her, if they play that right, I think it could go down in history again. I really think that it could. But again, I do hope that Square is not gonna take such a detour that it's not gonna happen. Because not only do I think that it would be a shame, I think that Square would see a lot of people with torches and pitchforks outside their HQ, because I don't think it would go down well, right? I think it's something that people are already, perhaps unknowingly, living toward too. There's been a lot of speculation already. There's a lot of people talking about, we know what's going to happen to Aerith. Yes, everyone knows. But with how the story has been unfolding at the end of the game, where so many elements feel just enough out of place to think, wait, this isn't supposed to happen. It kind of makes you wonder, is the story still going to be the same in the next game? Right? Are we going to follow the same path all the way to the city and the Temple of the Ancients? I guess we'll see. Who's to say at this point? The best part is that there's a fair chance it's not even going to happen in the next installment, but the installment after that, because there are a lot of landmarks that stand between Midgar and the Temple and City of the Ancients that can't just be omitted from the game, I don't think. Right? We have to go to Cosmo Canyon, where we encounter Bugenhagen, who is, of course, the co-founder of the ice cream company Häagen-Dazs. And we have to go to Junon. We have to go to the Gold Saucer. Right? I wonder if the date is still going to be a thing. I mean, I'd like to think it is, right? But there are a lot of landmarks that we can't just skip over. So even though I'm already wondering what's going to happen to Aerith, it might not even happen in the next installment. Or perhaps at the very end. I don't know how quickly they wish to rush through certain places that aren't of that significance. I mean, the Gold Saucer isn't that significant. I mean, it's a place you go to farm items, really, right? You go there to have chocobo races. I wonder if there are going to be chocobo races. I mean, in the original game, you need a gold chocobo to get, Knights of the Round, for example. And that is with a 1997 scale of the world in mind. If we're looking at a 2020 sort of scale of the world, perhaps taking a chocobo to get to the edge of the world that's not even on the map might be a bit out of reach. So perhaps stuff like that gets omitted as well. Even though, as far as minigames go, chocobo racing would be a cool minigame. But do we have to catch chocobo ourselves again? All questions that are fun to wonder. See if it's gonna be real or not. And with that, there's one last thing that I want to touch on, something that terrifies me, and it's something that I wish to impart with you as I take my leave. In the original game, once you hit Junon, you go from Junon to Costa del Sol, and you do this in a submarine. And I was fine with the submarine. Because I was dealing with 1997 style graphics. If the submarine is going to be in the next installment and you're going under, you might see the world from a 2020 graphical point of view, which means that you are alone in the dark, underwater, with just a spotlight to guide you. Theoretically speaking, at one point, Emerald Weapon is going to be down there. And if we're going by the scale that has already been presented in this installment, the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, you could argue that Emerald Weapon, once awakened, is gonna be a very, very big thing swimming down there in the ocean. And the fact of running into that thing underwater is something that terrifies me already. Now, in this point, I'm already scared of running into that thing. So, yeah, I didn't want to suffer that thought alone, so now you get to deal with it as well. And with that said, I think I've said my piece about what I think of this game. It's absolutely stellar. It blew my expectations straight out of the water. I think it did so for many people. And I can't wait for the next installment. It's going to be the sole reason for me to purchase a PlayStation 5. The Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. Absolutely. And with that said, people of the world, again, thank you so much for playing this game with me and for listening to me ramble about this game. I am the Hiraeth Gamer, and I will see you on the next one.